Welcome to our channel, Gray Matters. We are two neurodivergent ladies who fixate and need to share, and we've created this channel to do just that. Check out our podcast, Fixate Today, Gone Tomorrow, for some deeper dives.
Hey guys, this is Joy here. Today we're going to try something a little bit different. Nikki and I are each going to do what we do best. She's going to teach you a bit about immunity. After that, I will share some of my conspiratorial thoughts about the subject. Finally, hopefully, you all will share your thoughts with us in the comments.
We've already talked about the possibilities of someone involved in the Mica Miller case taking a plea deal. What if this went a step further and someone was offered complete immunity in exchange for cooperation? Legal immunity, or immunity from prosecution, is a legal status that says an individual or entity cannot be held liable for a law violation in order to facilitate prosecution of a crime of which the impact on society is larger than that of the immune person or entity. This can be in criminal court, civil court, or both. There are many different types of immunity for government leaders and officials, including in the U.S. and internationally. Diplomatic immunity, absolute immunity, qualified immunity, and judicial immunity all protect leaders and officials from prosecution while working in their appointed office. There is reporter's privilege, which provides immunity for journalists in order to protect their sources. And there is immunity of resident citizens. This includes witness immunity and spousal immunity. Prosecutors can grant case-by-case immunity under an agreement with the witness. There are two kinds of these types of immunity that can be granted. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, transactional immunity, quote, protects the witness from prosecution for the offense or offenses involved.
That's why it's more limited. Transactional immunity completely covers a defendant. So transactional immunity basically is a blanket immunity. It's the government is saying you will not be prosecuted for any of the following crimes, no matter what. Even if we learn independent evidence, we still will not prosecute you. So that's what
And use immunity, quote, only protects the witness against the government's use of his or her immunized testimony in a prosecution of the witness, except in a subsequent prosecution for perjury or giving a false statement.
Transactional immunity. So use immunity simply means that if a defendant comes in, testifies or does whatever in exchange for immunity, the government won't use anything that defendant says to prosecute that defendant later on. So if a defendant has use immunity and says, oh, by the way, I killed somebody, because of use immunity, the government actually can't use his statement to later prosecute him. But if the government finds independent evidence, separate and apart from what the defendant says, that points to his guilt, the government can use that information. So that's why it's more limited.
Why would immunity be utilized in the justice system? Well, let's go back to the beginning of the legal use of immunity. Immunity began with qualified immunity, dating back to the Reconstruction era. Qualified immunity protects government officials from charges while performing functions of their positions, unless the plaintiff shows a violation of established statutory or constitutional rights that a reasonable person should know. In 1871, the Civil Rights Act of 1871, or the KKK Act, was passed. This allowed the private right of action if an individual's rights had been violated by officials. This was a time that the KKK was terrorizing newly emancipated Black people by means of lynchings, mob violence, brutality, and intimidation. The act made it so the victims of this violence could sue government officials, such as police officers, from participating in this violence. Nearly 100 years later, in 1967, the Supreme Court heard the case of Pearson v. Ray, which ultimately protected police officers from civil litigation who arrested the Freedom Riders in Mississippi, thus negating the Civil Rights Act of 1871 and breathing new life into this Jim Crow relic. Since then, there has been an uptick in police brutality cases that have not been pursued under the terms of qualified immunity, as it has been made much more difficult to sue public officials for misconduct. In a 2018 Supreme Court dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that, quote, an absolute shield has been created by the Supreme Court, making victims prove that the official's conduct was unlawful and the officers should have known they were violating a clearly established law.
An honest mistake. So let's say there's a robbery, and a photo of the suspect is circulated. Because of the robbery, police officers are on high alert, and their top priority is catching the robber. Officer Dudley is eager to catch the suspect, and while driving, he sees Pete reading a book by a bus stop. Thinking that the man is the bank robber, Officer Dudley arrests him. Taken into custody, Pete is held for the robbery, but it soon becomes pretty clear that the police have the wrong guy, and naturally, Pete is furious over his arrest. So Pete files a civil lawsuit against Officer Dudley for falsely arresting him. In his case, Pete notes that between the hair, beard, and glasses, he and the suspect do not look very much alike, and Pete demands money as compensation for the wrongful arrest. But Officer Dudley's lawyer is likely to raise qualified immunity as a defense. He'll argue that even if Officer Dudley violated Pete's rights, Officer Dudley should be exempt from liability because he did not really know that he was arresting the wrong person. He'll claim he did not knowingly violate Pete's civil rights. He'll also argue that this was all a reasonable mistake, and even if Officer Dudley was careless or negligent, he did not intentionally violate the law. He'll claim
a prior court case is required to show that a similar action is illegal to establish precedent. However, if there has been no established case law, there will be no liability. The use of immunity was expanded in order to obtain witnesses in organized crime cases. It is easier for prosecutors to go after higher-level criminals through testimony of lower-level criminals in the ring. This kind of immunity offers an accommodation to excuse a criminal in order to prosecute a more serious criminal. This immunity, however, is conditional. It requires a high value in evidence provided, a link to a crime, or honestly held views about a crime, and it is transactional. More or less, society has agreed that leniency for a lower-level criminal is acceptable if it results in a conviction for a higher-level criminal. Spousal or marital privilege protects spousal communication and testimony. This is based on a legal fiction that recognizes a husband and wife as one person. Spousal privilege can be utilized in civil and criminal cases. Spousal privilege may be suspended in divorce or child custody proceedings, domestic abuse cases, or if the couple are found to have been joint participants in a crime.
Proceeding. One more time. Spousal immunity protects confidential marital communications and offers spousal testimonial privilege. Confidential marital communications are protected regardless of current marital status, unless they entail spousal conspiracy plans, or it's a criminal or civil case between spouses, or a spouse's mental competency proceeding.
A kind of, not really, but sort of, immunity is a fixed sentence. This is a specific or minimum period of time specified by statute of imprisonment, which cannot be adjusted. A defendant could serve more time, but cannot serve less. Let's talk about some examples of different types of immunity. In June 1973, Time magazine published an article reporting on the question of whether White House counsel John W. Dean should be granted immunity in exchange for testimony he could offer in the Watergate scandal. It became a question of if what Dean knew was worth not going after him. The Nixon administration toughened immunity, quote, to strike at the leadership of organized crime. In 1970, the Organized Crime Control Act, which Dean helped draft, passed, allowing for the immunity practice to be applied to any investigation, even federal ones. Congressional committees were given the power to grant immunity, and the transactional type of immunity was dropped, allowing for complete protection from any prosecution. Dean wanted full immunity from all prosecution, arguing that he was the only senior staff member who was in the position to testify, was willing to testify, and cooperated early with investigators. If a witness is given immunity, he cannot incriminate himself, meaning the Fifth Amendment cannot be invoked. Dean was offered a plea deal of a lesser sentence, but an admission of guilt would result in Dean being banned from practicing law. Dean threatened not to cooperate at all, if any indictment was filed against him. He was ultimately granted immunity, but not total immunity, and pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. He only ended up serving about 4 months, but he was disbarred as an attorney. The trial for Sean Diddy Combs on racketeering and sex trafficking charges has just wrapped up.
They call me Diddy, but y'all can call me Love.
The dazzling facade.
George Kaplan, Diddy's ex-assistant, worked for him from 2013 to 2015. Before testifying, Kaplan told the judge that he would invoke the Fifth Amendment if compelled to testify. He was granted immunity and testified to his role in purchasing and being a middleman in giving cash for deliveries requested by Diddy.
Terry, it's a big deal because just think about the confines of how that immunity deal works. We heard that Kaplan would have pled the fifth if he was to take the stand, meaning that his statements would have incriminated him. And don't forget, this is a RICO conspiracy case, so 2 or more people conspiring to commit criminal acts. And so the idea that I'm seeing here is that Kaplan would have testified to something that would have incriminated him and Sean Combs. Now he doesn't have to worry about incriminating himself, and he can give a full breath testimony as to what criminal actions he participated in, and more likely than not, how he did so at the behest of Sean Combs. And the directions of this case is going to turn, I think, in a way that shows this criminal enterprise is bigger than what we initially thought.
Yeah, and
Ex-National Enquirer publisher David Pecker was granted immunity in exchange for giving prosecutors information about his role and history with Donald Trump during the 2016 election. During the trial for 34 felony counts of falsifying business records with intent to further other crimes, Pecker testified that he manipulated coverage before the election. He would run positive stories about Trump and negative stories about his opponent. During Chad Daybell's trial, Lori Vallow's sister-in-law, Zulema Pastines, Lori's brother's widow, was granted immunity in exchange for cooperating with police. Her husband, Alex Cox, died under mysterious circumstances, and there have been whispers that Zulema was more involved in Chad, Lori, and Alex's crimes than we know. Zulema testified about Chad's visions, expelling demons, and Chad and Lori's relationship. Rapper Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug, went on trial under RICO charges. He allegedly participated with a criminal street gang that was responsible for violent crimes. Kenneth Copeland, aka Lil Woody, was given immunity in exchange for his testimony, as well as helping to build a case against Young Thug. Lil Woody actually ended up being held in contempt of court when he invoked his Fifth Amendment, which was not permissible under the immunity conditions. Jennifer Dulos vanished in May 2019. She is still missing to this day and presumed dead. Her estranged husband, Fotis Dulos, and his girlfriend, Michelle Tokonis, were charged in her disappearance. Fotis died by suicide, and Michelle is serving 14 and a half years for conspiracy to commit murder. A former employee of Fotis, Powell Gummany, was offered immunity before the trial despite authorities never believing he was a co-conspirator. Powell testified that his pickup truck was used to drive to and from Jennifer's house on the day she vanished, and Fotis shaved his head in a possible attempt to look more like Powell. According to his attorney, the immunity guarantee was, quote, more with respect to his own potential culpability in the disappearance. Sam Bankman-Fried, co-founder of a collapsed cryptocurrency trading platform, was charged with orchestrating multiple fraudulent measures relating to his crypto exchange. His old roommate, Adam Yedidia, worked as a software developer at the trading platform. He requested immunity as he was worried he may have facilitated a crime. He was concerned that code he had written could have contributed to the commission of a crime. So what does this have to do with Micah? Well, it is curious that after the FBI raided his home, after over a year of investigating and speculation, no charges have been brought against John Paul Miller. Have investigators identified him as perhaps a lower-level criminal in a larger ring of some sort? And if this is so, will this mean Micah herself may not receive the justice we're all hoping, but a larger criminal ring could be toppled? What we do know is if there's any offer on the table, whether it's immunity or a plea deal, to JP Miller, he must not only cooperate, but be honest with investigators.
So, why would we even think about the possibility that JP could have immunity in this case? I have told you all before that several months ago, I visited Myrtle Beach. And during my time there, I was able to go take a look at some of the locations that were pertinent to this case. I also had the opportunity to attend service at Solid Rock Church and meet many of the players that we've heard a lot about. Finally, I had several hours in which I was able to talk to JP and ask him questions about the case. I had three main takeaways from my time there. First was how unbelievably sinister I found Lumber River State Park to be. For those of you who have followed the case, you'll know that's where Micah's body was found. We've made a couple separate videos about that. Please go watch them if you haven't already. And second, although we feel like we know these people, we really only know what's been fed to us. And we do need to be cognizant of the fact that these are each human beings with lives and families, friends, and jobs, and we need to be careful with what we say about them. And finally, most relevant to this topic of immunity was just how many times JP told me he was telling the truth and he was being honest. Now, I've shared this before and I took a lot of heat from it. I am not saying that I believe him. I am not saying that he doesn't twist his words, that he doesn't avoid answering certain questions. He doesn't avoid answering certain questions, pleads ignorance, changes the subject, chooses his words very carefully, and lies by omission, etc. But why would he be so insistent about this honesty when talking to a random YouTuber with a channel that has 1,000 subscribers who knocked on his door and began asking him questions? Do note, when I spoke to him, he specifically stated that everything he said to me was true, not everything he had said from day one. Also, as far as I can remember, he has not spoken publicly or even been seen after the time we spoke. He said it so many times, it seemed particularly intentional. Maybe as if he wanted a final chance on the record that he was being technically truthful from there on out. And why would that be so important? It would be really important if you had taken an immunity deal which requires 100% honesty, and if that honesty is broken, so is the full immunity deal. And then there is this text that I received from him. This is the first time I have shared it because I'm not sure what to make of it. However, when we decided to explore immunity deals, it really stuck out in my mind. In my opinion, there are also clues in the FBI raid, but we'll have to get into that on another video. So if JP has negotiated for immunity and walks away free, but is helped to bring down more powerful criminals and put them in prison, will you feel like justice has been served? My guess that most people will not. It's complicated, and only time will tell. Unfortunately, the public may never know.
Thank you for listening. Please comment, like, and subscribe. You can also check out our podcast, Fixate Today, Gone Tomorrow, for more content. Have anything you'd like us to fixate on? Reach out and let us know. Thanks for joining us. Disclaimer: we are not investigators, journalists, detectives, law enforcement, or historians. We are two neurodivergent ladies who just hyperfixate. Please do not take our opinions and ideas as statements of fact. All allegations are just that. We are not accusing anyone of anything, simply offering our interpretation of what we've researched.